So, hello everybody and welcome to our table talk. This is the Indian Animal Studies Collective, and we are really happy to welcome today Elisabeth Luggauer from the University of Würzburg in Germany. And we are going to be reading and discussing with her her article on contact zones, which is based on a research study that she carried out in the capital of Montenegro, Podgorica. Podgorica, musste ich sagen, ne, eigentlich? Okay. Before we actually get down to it, I just want to say to everybody else who's here, we think of these talks not as, us, the organizers, talking to the guest, but really as an open conversation. So therefore, the table talk. Please feel free to pitch in with your questions, with your comments, with your observations at any point of time. Switch on your microphone, talk, or if you're more comfortable, put in your questions and your comments in the chat and we can take them up that way as well. So, Elisabeth, first of all, I wanted to say that a lot of what you observe in your article resonates a lot with us in India as well, such as the coexistence of human and canine urban inhabitants, because we have exactly the same thing, and how they together design urban spaces. To begin with, I am curious to know why you chose Montenegro for your ethnographic field research.
I will keep myself unmuted. Let's hope that there are not too many background noises. Well, actually, this whole research project, I mean, this paper is part of my PhD project, which is now finally soon to be finished. And I came up with this research idea actually from a research subject that I was working on before. I'm educated and socialized in the south of Austria, which means in urban contexts of this modernity, European urban spatial odor things. And in my master studies, we did a great study program on urban odors and who is included and who is excluded. And while I was working on this project about finding out what bodies and what habits and what subjects are excluded of this urban space, this urban spatial odor, I was already living with one dog, and walking him made me realize how much of other than human is excluded. That there is several human things are excluded, but basically everything that is non-human is excluded from this urban idea of European modernity, where public spaces have different rules from private spaces, where nature is separated from culture, where bodies, emotions, all that is aligned with nature, like animals, plants, have to be in a certain order and controlled in order to be welcomed in this urban space. So I made my master thesis on that, on discourses and politics about dogs and nature in this one urban space in Graz. And what I learned in this master thesis is, as I described it now, is that they are very welcomed as long as they are on short leashes, as long as they are controlled and vaccinated and they have some special training. Then bourgeoisie culture is very happy with them. But if they are not like that, then they are not really welcome in this urban order. And then I got curious to decenter this very strong hegemonial idea of how an urban space has to be. And I looked at it on what I thought is the opposite of it, of this idea of dog, and that was the street dog. He's not on a leash, there is no owner you can track him to, he's not vaccinated. All these pictures and images we have about street dog, I started then to follow. And when you picture me sitting in Graz, then the next way to go was Southeastern Europe. And I started with, as we would call it, anthropological travels or explorative research through cities in Southeastern Europe. I went through Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and then also Montenegro, and started to explore how is it possible then, if it seems so unimaginable in this urban order in Graz, how is it possible in other urban orders where it's just everyday? And the Podgorica was a place where several lines came together. I heard in Croatia, I heard stories when you want to find street dogs, you have to look to the countries which are not in European Union. So they sent me to Bosnia and Montenegro. And in Bosnia, I heard when you want to look at street dogs and the discourse, what does that have to do with European Union, then you have to go to Montenegro because they are actually about to become a member. So I got the stories sent me around in this area. And at the time when I was in Podgorica, I had to make it a real project. It was the time when I had to have the proposal. It was the time when I had to start applying for funding. So Podgorica is also a little bit of a coincidence. Why it became exactly this city in this Southeast European Balkan context. Yeah.
That's interesting because I did think about that, since you also mentioned in your article studies done by other people observing or focusing on street dogs in other European cities, in the South European cities. The other question that I wanted to ask you at the outset already was that you also mentioned in your article, and we know that from our experience here in India, that there are different terms used in research and other kinds of discourses to denote the street dog. No? So some people use stray dog, others street dog, free roaming dog, free ranging dog. In India, people are increasingly using the term community dog to kind of it belongs to the community, not to one in that sense owner, but it's a part of the community, belongs to the community. Did you consciously decide to use the term stray dog for your article, or was this, I mean, does this like imply something, or is this just one of the options?
Thanks for that question. It's good to explain that. I started with the interest. I started with my German terms, which we in German language call them either Straßenhund, which is street dog, or streunender Hund, which is stray dog. And it, I mean, this term implies sort of a pathologizing of a subject of how a dog should be. You know, it's sort of the opposite of the idea of a dog, which is binded to a house and to an owner, and is not roaming around. And in this article, I actually used the English, since this paper is in English, I used the English translations of the terms that I used in Montenegrin and Serbian. So when it's either pas lutalice, which means a straying dog, or it's a ulični pas, which means like a dog off the street. So I translate them then again into street dog and stray dog. And when research partners spoke with me in English, they mostly use just stray. This is a stray, or I saw a stray. Street dog was less common. I also want to mention that during this research project, research partners who are involved in animal welfare activities, they try to sort of launch different terms for these dogs in order to point out a little bit the connection they actually have with humans, because the street dog or the stray dog, it has a bit of a meaning of it's something that is very different from us. We have nothing to do with that. It has been there, it was always there, it will always be there. But this research partners from animal welfare organizations are very much sure that the nowadays street dog population in Podgorica is a result from an ongoing trend of keeping more dogs as pets. So they see a strong connections between practices, human practices, that results then to more street dogs. And they try to call them, launch more the term of a bezdomni pas, which is a dog without a home, or an napuštenipsi, which is like an abandoned or kicked out dog. So in order to put the stray back to the human, you know, to highlight the connection. So when I use it here in English, stray or street dog, it's a translation of the terms that I found are the most used. And maybe I should also use a little bit more the napušteni or the bezdomni pas in order to help the animal welfare activists to spread the term. I always mention it in the papers.
Yeah, I had a question about that. You know, I was wondering about the history of the stray dogs and the origin where they come from. That is always so confusing. And in your paper, you mentioned that some of these street dogs abandoned pet dogs, because I've noticed that, you know, Western audiences usually think of street dogs as abandoned pet dogs, but usually they're not just that. So in Montenegro, is there such a history?
Yeah, yes, I'm a bit unsatisfied with the historical approach I managed in this project. I'm not a historian myself, and there is not so much research done about history of dogs in Southeastern Europe. Unfortunately, there's a little bit about the Ottoman Empire, which I think could be interesting to contextualize that. And then, of course, we have history about how dogs have been present in Western and Northern European cities. We have a lot about that, but in the middle, I would say we have a bit of a black hole. So what I can give you, coming from stories, which is, when I use the term story, I mean it, everything that a research partner, a human research partner, maybe even a canine research partner, tells me is for me a story. It doesn't matter if it's the truth. I'm not looking for the truth. I'm looking for how subjective reality is explained. So this is when I say story. And the short-term story is that there have always been street dogs. Like when you, no matter how old my research partners are, and we go back to 80-something, and then to the stories of the grandparents people have been told, the story is always, there always have been street dogs or stray dogs around. And then the story gets a bit of a shift when most of them say, but it has never been as much as now. And then we get as an explanation, why is it so much now? Is because of this spreading trend of keeping dogs as pets. And that would lead, in combination with not castrating them or letting them walk on their own, and also abandoning them when they are not wanted anymore or when they get sick, that then leads to future street dogs, so to say, that then reproduce themselves, of course. So I would say there is both. There are these street dogs who go back to generations of street dogs, and there are street dogs who have maybe been abandoned yesterday and are today then a street dog. And when we go back, what I can offer as a longer perspective is some research I found from a very interesting historian in Istanbul, Cihan Gündoktu. I can maybe write the name down. He did some research on what has happened to street dogs in Istanbul at beginning of, I think, well, end of 19th, beginning of 20th century, like how this, when in England started this dog fancy, as Harry Treadwell describes it, as keeping dogs as pet dogs and so on, and how this thing then spread from England and also reached Ottoman Empire at the end of its existence, when it started to open itself more to Western and European practices. And how then the street dogs in Istanbul became pathologized. First, they were sort of normal and around, and they dealt with them on their own. And then suddenly it became a problem and something that was monitored, and a hygiene issue and so on. And with that also came, as Gündoktu points out, this idea of having dogs as pets. So we have sort of a longer perspective of shifting of the street dog own dog relations. And one thing, since I interpret your question not only asking me about the history, but also about the connection of the street dog and the own dog. And that's an interesting thing, because I also got here several stories from several different directions. There are people who really think that the street dog is a completely different type of a dog. It's a dog that does not need regular water. It's a dog that has several diseases that other dogs don't have, but he can also deal with these diseases very well because it's a street dog. He's fine in super sunny weather, and he's also fine in really cold days. But the Kuchny Pass, which is then usually a purebred dog, he's not so fine with that. And then I have two canine, let's say, co-researchers who let me get a very deep perspective into this human-animal relations subject in Podgorica, and one of them was a stray. He has a look that several research partners interpreted as, this is a dog who looks like generations of the street. He doesn't have the face of the breeds that are popular nowadays. He doesn't have a Labrador or Pitbull face. He looks more like a tiny German Shepherd, which were common. It's since the beginning of the 20th century. When he started to move in with me step by step, and when he then started to accompany me to areas which I usually, let's say, intended for owned dogs, like for example, this one dog park they have, then it was always a bit of a story like, yeah, okay, maybe he's vaccinated now, but maybe he still has some diseases, or he will never really change because he is a stray, so he will always stay a stray. So he will always be sort of a little bit of in between these two worlds, no matter how long he is now living with you and all that. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit carried away in my answer. I'm sorry.
No, that was perfect. Anu and I were just talking about how our Indian dogs that we have in our home always fare better health-wise than the other dogs because they're so sturdy and so strong. I wanted to ask you about this phrase that you used in your paper and one that you mentioned now. You call them the research partners. And, what exactly, I suppose one of the things you want to do is to construct a social history of urban spaces that also includes them. But do you also want to...
I'll write it down.
Yeah, but I noticed that ethnographically, it means that you also assume a position of care because you do want to protect this particular research partner as opposed to other research partners, other human research partners who can fend for themselves. Is there an element of care and responsibility towards non-human research partners?
Yeah, let me clear something about the term of the co-researcher. That also brings me to this idea of ethnography. There is idea of ethnography that one human mindset goes somewhere and then explains another life world and then writes a story about it. This is why we call it ethnography, like you write the people down. So since the early days of this method, it fortunately made some transformations, and we think now about doing ethnographic research much more as a collaborative project where you try to meet, you don't have subjects, you have, you for sure don't have objects, but you don't even have subject, you have research partners, they build with you the research field and they actively make the research with you, and at the end you write a story, hopefully very much aligned with their stories. So when I say I have this non-human co-researcher or maybe even para-ethnographer, then I'm especially referring on my dog who started the fieldwork with me, who just joined me there because I went there for 8 months, and it was very practical also to have him with me. And he became a tool because being in this research field of multi-species relations as a multi-species team just on its own opened up so many questions, so many conversations, so many situations. Because when we think about ethnography, we think first about participant observations. That means you as your research body, you are in the field of research, whatever that is. And being in this multi-species body team just circled around the research subject around me all the time and opened up these concrete research situations, like, for example, the contact zone between the woman and the dog in the Café Berlin that is described in this paper. And in a similar way, also then this other dog became sort of a research partner, because these discussions or these conversations I had on behalf of him or only because of him, then again opened so many new informations about this field site. So, and when we speak about ethnography as a method, then there is this idea of ethnography should be somewhere between distance and proximity. And some researchers or some colleagues would say we need a lot of distance, and some of us would say no, we need a lot of proximity. And this is an ongoing discussion in anthropological conversations, and I would describe myself in the middle, but very much more to proximity. I think we need a lot of proximity, but a lot of reflection. Like, the deeper we can go in, the more we will find out, but we have to reflect that. Like, we have to reflect our own positions, our own positionality, and also the dynamics of power that are always in every research field, no matter how much we try to make it a research partner situation. And I would say that my style of ethnography in that project was definitely also a little bit of an activist research. Like my style of participant observation was not to sit there and to listen. Most of my participant observation I carried out, it's not so much in this paper, but in another context zone I carried out by actually working in a camp of street dogs, like by removing ticks, by feeding them, by looking for them when they were lost. So this is, I would say, I participated in the activities of the humans who take care of these dogs, but I also did actual work on the bodies of the dogs and sort of, I mean, we can make it very dramatically now. Maybe I saved some of their lives by removing ticks from them. So which I would say is a very much a sort of an activist research. Yeah. And it's, well, fieldwork is usually very dense, you know, you have many things going on, and somehow you have to keep this research diary all the time, always with everything that happens, which is sort of impossible to manage in a dense fieldwork situation. And I remember myself sitting, I was still smoking in those days, and I remember myself smoking a lot and thinking, am I too deep in? What should I do? Because especially this tiny stray, I think you're referring to the situation in Café Berlin where he made a mess. And I felt a little bit responsible for this mess because he was in this cafe because he followed me from my home. So I sort of brought him there, and now he's making a mess in that cafe, which is making a mess in a cafe, but also it puts himself in danger because the barking aggressive dog is the dog who gets kicked then. And I had a lot of emotions to deal with in this fieldwork, and a lot of I had a good supervisor, and I had a good system of also ethno-psychoanalytical supervision, where we speak about these things. How do we go into the field, and what do we do with our research field, and how are we influencing it, all that. Yeah, it was tricky.
Yeah, this is something that even I had thought about while reading your article, because again, coming from a background which is mostly literary studies and not having had much exposure to ethnography, I found it really fascinating how the body of the researcher functions in that sense as the initial point of ethnographic research. You know, this was the most alien to me, but then that's why also really fascinating, and how it creates the field of research and dialogue with its protagonists instead of kind of remaining outside and distant, and how there is this opening of all the senses. But I then also wondered whether this opening of all the senses makes it difficult to retain an objective distance. And I was thinking of this also in reference to the instance that we just mentioned, where you felt responsible for the little street dog who was barking at the husky. Tanya felt responsible for Angela, and you know, I then also questioned whether it was important at all for the kind of project that you were working in to have an objective distance at all.
I don't know how many ethnographers or anthropologists are with us here. So I would, if there are, I'm happy to start discussions. All this, I would say, social sciences who go there into fieldwork, they all have to deal somehow with this idea of objectivity, which comes from positivism, and how can we study culture but being completely objective. I for myself found myself in a way where I would say objectivity is never possible in no research setting. And even if you look at the natural sciences who say they are so super objective, they study cancer because their parents died of cancer. So let's look together for how objective that is. What I think is important is to make it understandable for others, and to sort of open your subjectivity, because then it becomes objectivated, and then others can follow your line of thought, and then can criticize you on your interpretations. So when I think in particular about ethnography now, what can ethnography do to become sort of And objective research is then to put all that in, you know, to put your subjectivity in, to show the place where you come from, to show the ideas where you come from, and also to show the way how your interpretations happen and who is this subject, who is interpreting. So then that other people can jump in and say, okay, but at this point, others would have another interpretation, which is completely okay, because we just tell one story. And everyone else who would have maybe been even in the same research field as I have been would tell a completely different story. That's, I would say, good thing about social and cultural sciences, but also a bad thing, because we always have one story. So we need big projects, we need many researchers, and we need collaborative research out of that. So I would say basic skill or basic element of this ethnographic work is the reflection, is then coming out of this, being deep inside of the field situation, and reflecting what sides are you maybe missing, and what sides should you take into account as well, because it's very easy then. I mean, I apparently like dogs. This first dog that I have, he was already from a shelter, so I have apparently not so much a thing for purebred dogs, and I have some sympathy for street dogs. Otherwise, I would not have adopted the former one from Slovakia years before I even started with that project. And then I go there and then go to Podgorica with all my mindset. This reflection in between is important, so that you would not get carried away just with the animal activists, you know, not to get away just with the people who love them, who help them, but that you also pay attention to administrative agencies, for example, to take them into account, and also people who live there who are really afraid and really don't like them, also to take them into account. So I think it's a balance between proximity and then coming back out, reflecting and trying to see all the other sides. So the goal would be to write a multi-sided story that takes several sides in. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question well.
That does answer my question. Thank you, Elisabeth. And that really brings me very neatly to the other thing that I had been thinking about, which was the statement that you mentioned in your article that apparently several people made while you were there, namely street dogs have always been around. And this sort of always thing seems to indicate an acceptance of their presence by the human dwellers of Podgorica, to say, yeah, they've always been here, so it makes sense that they are here. No, we don't see them as not having to be here. At the same time, usually when people say that someone or something comes from elsewhere, then there's kind of like this process of othering involved, and there's some kind of hostility or suspicion. I mean, we see this, for example, with the whole coronavirus thing going on right now. We've seen that with other instances. We've seen that with migrants. We've seen that in a lot of scenarios. And usually this sort of a thing of placing someone or locating the origins of someone elsewhere also involves this kind of a rejection, this sort of hostility or suspicion or whatever. So the other always comes from elsewhere. So how do these two attitudes, you know, street dogs have always been around and street dogs come from somewhere else, how do those two sort of flow in together in a city like Podgorica? What was your experience, or what sort of attitudes did you observe while you were there?
Mm-hmm. So the people behind the story, they have always been around. They can be from all directions. Like I have heard that they have always been around from people who always liked them, took care of them forever, since they remember already. The parents and grandparents always took care. I like the term of the community dog you used. Sort of also already the parents and grandparents have always been involved in a community care for street dogs. But it was also explained by people who said it was always a huge problem, and it is becoming a bigger problem. So they have always been there, comes from several directions. It comes as okay, but it also comes as resignation, and it also comes as protest. It also comes announced as as a frustration with the governmental system, who for some people seems to fail, since these dogs are still around and becoming more. So always around is referring to something that must have always been somehow every day, but not necessarily a peaceful every day. So there are several stories about what the city and the municipality did when there were too many street dogs around, how they then managed to lower the population a little bit. So that brings both together. Like there has always been a problem, but it was always okay. That's possible from two sides. And I'm not sure if I understood your second part of your question. Could you maybe help me a little with that?
It was just this idea of, usually when we say about something, an entity, a person, a phenomenon, a practice, anything, that it comes from somewhere else, then in this placing or situating of something or someone somewhere else in a different place, there is some degree of, rejection or hostility involved. It's kind of like you see it as being foreign, you see it as being alien, you see it as not being one of you. And so, the two of them seem to me like, this alwaysness and then this coming from somewhere elseness. How do these things, because they are two very different things.
Mm-hmm. Let's try to play it a little bit black and white. When I think of in what situations and from whom and why did I hear have always been around, and in what situations did I hear it's new and it's a problem, then this have always been around usually refer to street dogs. As I just said, either in a okay harmonic way, have always been around, or it has always been a problem. And when we think about something that is new, then we come to the also described by, I'm quoting here, the trend, the European trend of keeping dogs as pets. This is what we can refer to as new and coming from somewhere else. And this is indeed something that has, I would say, I got it explained very often as problematized, as something that is new and it is annoying, because when we look at this whole, as it got described, either a trend of Europe or a trend from the West, these two formulations were used. Then it is, as you say, it is something new and it is something that needs to have some negotiation. And what is coming aligned with that is the idea, or it makes the dog a different agent in urban places, in urban spaces. Because when I draw now a picture about the street dog, it's a dog who is in public spaces. He is around on the streets. He has his feeding places somewhere, and he adapt or get build some sleeping places. But he's sort of a liminal subject around in the public space. And this new trend of keeping dogs as pets, that means that they are in restaurants, they are in cafes, they are in bars. That means that with this, when we think about Harriet Reed really describes it very well as dog fancy. When dogs become a part of leisure culture, then it means you have several dogs walking with you on the boulevard, then they are suddenly differently present in a public space. And this is something that caused a lot of annoyment. It caused a lot of annoyment and also negotiation. Like, then which bar will allow a dog inside, which restaurant will allow a dog inside. And a network has been formed up of where you can go with your dog, where you cannot go with your dog. And then bars became the image suddenly of pet friendly or not so pet friendly. Then this it's also an subject of economy and of precarity. I mean, when we think of some incomes in Podgorica, which are around 150 euros, and the place where you live costs 100 euros. So there is also a lot of rejection. Like, how can people spend a lot of money for a dog while other people don't have enough money to eat and to live? So also that came with this new trend. And then we get, of course, a lot of these cliche stories, like then the small white dog is more aligned with the woman, and this pit bull and Labrador then becomes the dog of the young boy. who also goes to fitness centers. And then we get sort of a multi-species cliche of this boy and this dog. So when we, I think I can say that when it comes about something new and negotiation with new and also otherness with new things, then I would bring it to this trend of the rather new. I mean, when I started this research, it was 2015, 16, and I then got told it's 10, 15 years. So it's now around 20 years trend that seems to cause negotiation and annoyment, but on both sides, of course, on the people who follow this new lifestyle of having your dog and of these people who do not find it so cool. Was that where you wanted to go?
Yes, that's where I wanted to go. We will take up some more because you mentioned a couple of things that triggered a few more questions in my mind. But I see that Susan has raised her hand, Rinu raised her hand, and Daniela has raised her hand. Susan, you raised your hand first. Why don't you go first?
I had a question, Elisabeth, about contact zones. I was thinking about what you said earlier about how in the research you conducted, you tried to account for not just the perspective of the activists, but also other points of entry. And, Haraway's contact zone, so her theorization of animals that has been criticized for not taking into account the ethical questions or how unequal the relationship is. I had two questions. One, if in your research, if the contact zones, how you managed to negotiate the unequalness or the asymmetry of power in the contact zones. And second, in the contact zones that you investigated, even in the story that you narrate, it's the relation between Tanya and Angela. And it's, Tanya has an affinity or she cares about the dog to some extent. And do you think contact zones or narrating contact zones are more fruitful when it is between people who seem to care for these animals, as opposed to possibly other encounters where people don't care for them?
Mm-hmm. I came up with using the concept of the contact zone exactly because of this very prominent example that Haraway makes between herself and her own dog. And we have several concepts about how we can think multi-species worlds, assemblage, network, and multi-species communities, all that. And when I met this woman and this dog in Café Berlin, I then, out of these two of them, they were the first contact zone that I discovered, and out of the two of them, I came up with the term of the contact zone, this woman and the dog. I'm aware of the critiques against Haraway and not taking into account so much the power relations between human and everything else. What from the ethnographic perspective, what became interesting for me is actually what agency do this woman and this dog have in this contact zone. Like when we think about animal agency as something that happens in a network, and that is sort of always a reaction to something and reacting on something. And so for me, it became interesting to find out how do they negotiate their relation and what are their power relations in between, So how much of it does Angela and how much of it is the woman? And in that, I would say that it was very interesting to see actually how much agency Angela got in this contact zone, how Angela was actually the one who initiated this contact zone by sort of asking again and again to enter this cafe, and then finally got permission to go in. And then how Angela was the one who developed this special bark as a call for food that then let the human provide her food for her. And also when Angela's paws were hurt, she cut them very often with glass, for example. And like for this woman, Angela came with a bleeding paw, and for this woman it was like, okay, she's bleeding, but she doesn't want me to look at it. okay, when I think about me and my dog, and he doesn't want me to look at it, I'm sorry, I will look at it, you know? He has so much less agency in moments like that. And for them, it was just okay. And also how Angela was sort of free in deciding when she goes where and when she enters the place, and also how she found out how she can open herself this door on her own and then goes on her own. So when we go a little bit aside from the concept of the contact zone and taking it into this one example and look where the agency is there and what makes the agency, then I think I could find out very interesting thing about how much agency actually Angela has and how much she made this contact zone, and how also she was sort of the one who defined the extension of the contact zones by these also other places that she then started to adapt, and how also she made people to follow her and to look for her when she was not around in the real places. So how she actually in some things got a little bit of a leading role. That's a romantic story, because at the end Angela died because she was poisoned. So Angela died in November 2019. She was, long after I had published this paper, she was found in one of the bars where she was regularly around with quite obvious symptoms of being poisoned. She was taken to a vet. She died there. So it's a romantic story when I say Angela made so much of this contact zone and she had so much agency, but at the end she died because we have an asymmetry of agency here. So when we take it on this individual, we can find out great things. But when we take it on a structural, general society level, then this contact zone also proves again the asymmetry between humans and others. And it again proves how, let's say, how unsecure this urban public space at the end was for Angela, and how she did not, was apparently not accepted enough not to be poisoned, you know? What's that?
Right. Renu, would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Hello, I apologize for not turning on the video. I'm from Kerala, and for the past few years, there has been a rise in street dog bite incidents, and there has been some alarm in different parts of Kerala, and many ecologists have spoken about human beings being responsible for creating such a pack behavior in dogs that have turned them aggressive. And I would like to narrate a particular phenomena that has been happening in my neighborhood for the past less than 2 years. I would think that maybe perhaps after the pandemic, where we have a pack of dogs. There are 12 to 15 of them who take the same route every night around 2 to 3 a.m. They'll go from one place to maybe 2-3 kilometers to another place at the same hour. We get to know them passing because the dogs in the neighborhood, the domestic dogs in the neighborhood, would make all kinds of noise. And about a year or so, when one of my kittens disappeared, I was inquiring the neighborhood about what could have happened, and many were referring to the fact that the dogs could have taken her. And there was this particular very interesting narrative that a lady told me, is that a local god who we call the Madam, he also travels. He has been traveling from one temple to the other temple around the same time, around 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. So she told me that the dogs are his companions, and the dogs could be accompanying the local god as he in his daily midnight travel from one temple to the other. And she advised me that it's better not to get out or come out during that time, because if the god gets to see you, then you're done. So this event has started happening very recently, like less than 2 years, I think, after the pandemic. But then again, there is this local myth that is being formed and coined along with this. We can see instances of such very recent um, literal myth creations around animal activities. Like crows have ceased to appear on day, and now crows have begun to appear at night because they don't have enough food because of the lockdown. So they are catching insects from street lights. So crows have begun to appear, and my mother-in-law was telling me it's bad luck to have crows come out at night, but they are just trying to live. So there is this myth and stories being constructed around animals trying to survive, and animals also behaving and contributing to the myth creation, because these dogs are very agile. They can climb really tall walls, they can walk through walls, they actually behave and contribute into these stories. So do we have such instances in Podgorica? And I would like to know your comment on such uh, you know s- creation of stories. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that story. I took several notes. I two things. When I think now about the research partners who shared stories about how dogs are around in the city and how what they would do and why they would do what they do, then let me try to open up two groups. Let's say the regular people, and then the people who get some sort of an expert role, who either are involved in animal welfare activism or are veterinarians and so on. So have some sort of a different knowledge than just the everyday knowledge about dogs. And the explanations why they move or how do they move, that doesn't seem to, now when you made me thinking, but now that doesn't seem to interest many of the, as I would say, research partners who are not involved in animal activism or veterinarians. There, on this, let's say, side, I don't want to make too many categories, but just on an analytical level. What was interesting there is that they were always just there, and then they were gone again. So, and there was not so much of an interest where they come from and why are they here now. It's just, it was there one day and then was around for a while and then was gone again. And the activists or also people who paid more attention to the moving of the dogs through the streets, and they problematized very much this idea, this behavior of forming a pack. And they explained forming a pack around a female in heat. Like when a female is in heat, then a pack would form around her. And the problems of being aggressive or attacking people, attacking other dogs, attacking also dogs from people, was linked quite much to packs. So their main one of their main goals was prevent packs. And that means they were very active in finding out when somewhere was a female in heat. Then they tried to take the female in heat out from the streets and put her in the shelter so that no pack can be formed around her. And they also tried to implement some sort of strategies of preventing too large packs who would stay then together, because apparently the idea or their experience was that as long as dogs are not in packs, people are less afraid, people are less have less problems with them, and also they act less. I'm not so happy with the word aggressive, but let's say they reacted less active in a way like that. But I'm thinking now, if I get any mythological stories about why dogs moving around and all that, and I'm sorry, I didn't get any of them, and I feel like a bit sorry now for that. No, just sort of behavioral explanations and explanations coming back to the agency of dogs, like giving them a lot of wishes, like this dog wants to go there because there is this, and this dog has the wish to do that, and so on, that I can give. Hope that answers or contextualizes your thoughts a bit.
Thank you.
Right. And Daniela, you've raised your hand too. Would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I've been hearing you guys, and I came to me a lot of ideas. First of all, thank you, Elisabeth, for sharing with us your paper. I have two questions. First, I heard that you were working on emotions in the past. So I was wondering, in the contact zones, we can talk about experience. I was thinking of Yifutuan Space and Place, and I think Cafe Berlin became, from both Angela and Tanja, a place of meeting, memories, and also security. So how can you, I don't know, put like the experience material in your theory or in your next investigations? The second question is like, it's more than an anecdotic one. Maybe it's different from the way that dogs are perceived in your countries, but I would like to share with you the experience of street dogs in Colombia from the anthropological perspective of an author that I read months ago. Her name is Maria Teresa Salcedo, and she wrote a text called Being a Stray Dog, Mimicry and Inurbanity in Urban Space in Bogota. So later I will share with you the text. She makes an approach on the dynamics and the spaces of interrelation between humans and animals in the urban context, particularly in the street. And she understood the street as the living space and the space of creation of habits. There she combines like identity as a product of the symbiosis in urban spaces. So that's the place for stray dogs, like the alterity of human that are also in that places. For example, people that we perceive as homeless. So she combines that an identity, like the stray dogs, and people who live in the streets. So she also say that urban spaces are considered the space of something that is different from your countries, I think, but here is a space of garbage, a space of waste, of abandoned objects, and street dogs also. So she finds that food and garbage are the mimetic points of convergence between both actors, not only for their corporeality, but also for the sensitivity that they have with their environment. So for example, she sees that dogs that live in the streets, they have their teeth on the claws different from the dogs that are domesticated, because the teeth and the claws adapt to that environment in the urban space. So I was thinking about, for example, if you found like that kind of approach in your work or in your visit that you made at Podgorica, that maybe stray dogs were adapted to the environment of urban space. For example, with Angela, you show us how was her hair, how grassy was her hair, and so. But what about something that is more physical, like teeth, like claws, like the way that her tail moves or something? I was wondering about that, and I think that maybe that paper can enrich your investigation. I hope so. So I would like to share with you like in another moment, but yeah, I have like that question about experience and that anecdotal one about my country. So thank you so much for sharing your investigation, Elisabeth.
Thank you very much for this comment. I'm highly interested in this paper, and I'm very interested in this perspective on how to see an urban space, because that's actually exactly what I'm aiming for. I have the sort of project of finding other explanations of urban spaces than the canonical from Western cities, Chicago School, and so on. So yes, I'm collecting that. happy to get that. The thing is, I wrote this paper in 2018, so I was sort of a baby in my PhD, so I would pay a deeper focus on some aspects in this paper nowadays if I would write it again today. What you mentioned now about Berlin and memory and place, I'm not sure if I understood right the direction that you want to go, but I started to pay more attention on what happens with this place and how this place then becomes a multi-species storied place. Like, because this woman and this dog make this cafe their center of their contact zone, and by making it their center of their contact zone, it becomes not only their multi-species place, but it becomes known in the city as a multi-species place. I will have I will have that then in the thesis, because in the meantime Angela died, and I could see in this have now a lack of the English word, the things you write about something after this person has died. Is it an obituary? Is it that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Anu. So in the obituaries on Angela, which were announced on several Facebook pages or local media pages, first of all, it was visible how well known she was in the center of the city as Angela, with this name that was given because of this Café Berlin. And then also how the Café Berlin was known as a multi-species place in this contact zone. Yeah, because then she was linked to that place, and it was said that how sad it is that this place is now without Angela, who has made this place so much more than just a cafe, just a meeting point. I mean, when we just look at Angela, at this, just on Angela for a second, and take her a little bit out of the context. No, that's impossible. It's not possible to take her out of the context. But what Angela can tell us about place and about practices of using the street just with her body is a lot. She got her identity. She was just a white dog who showed up one day, and she got her whole identity with this name because she chose the Café Berlin. I don't know yet, it should be in the paper. She got this name Angela because she chose Café Berlin, and she was not that skinny, and so she reminded the woman and some guests of Café Berlin. She reminded her of the back then Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel. This is how she got the name. So there is a strong link between the place and story and memory, and also how out of Angela, I mean, I made my stories out of Angela's body. I touched this body several times in the fieldwork, and I learned to understand the signals. I learned to okay, when it's summer and her coat is wet, and I knew she was swimming in Moracha because there's nowhere else where she could have been swimming, and I saw her swimming there myself. And when also the woman in Berlin and also other guests made stories from this body, like when she had gum on her body, then the story was, okay, apparently she rolled again in the grass, and that must have been in Jekushev Park. So there, out of this one place, it becomes a very dense multi-species story where sort of Angela is rendering the place, is rendering the places she visits together as a story that then gets told and transported by the human storytellers. That I can contribute to memory. And what was the other question about the different? Did you mean the different behaviors or the different ways of adaptation, or identity between humans and street dogs?
Yes, I was wondering, like, if you, for example, in your visit in Podgorica, you found that Tanja saw, for example, that Angela was adapting herself to the environment, because here we have like a difference between stray and street dogs, as you guys were talking in the first half of this meeting. Street dogs are all the dogs that are abandoned and they grew up in the streets. And for the circumstances of their living lives, like in the streets, they have to adapt their claws, their teeth. Also, they are, I don't know, big or smaller according to the environment. So I was wondering if you find in that time, for example, that kind of circumstances with dogs in Podgorica.
Yeah, what I researched, like as I found this woman and this dog in Café Berlin, I found several other relations that I then started naming contact zones, and I focused on 3 of them. And so besides Café Berlin, there is one camp of constructed dog huts in the woods, a little bit on the outside of the city. And the third contact zone is, I can actually maybe then share papers I wrote on the other contact zones. And the other one is a group of dogs that started to gather around a pet shop. Pet shop is the local word for a shop that would sell everything that you need for having a pet, which is the food, the leash, but also food for birds and all that. And the third contact zone was a group of dogs that started to gather around one of these pet shops. And I have this that leaves now actually a little bit my job as an ethnographer, because I'm interested in the non-human research partners. As I say, I'm interested in their practices, as I dare to call them, and what the practices of the non-human research partners do in the network that I'm studying, like how I explained with Angela what they do to make the contact zone, and how do then a multi-species everyday space is formed, how out of the city becomes a multi-species everyday space. And what I could see in the direct comparison between my super paradise dog, who lives in a home since he has been 4 months old, and his not ability of getting himself food by himself, and all the street dogs that joined this research somehow, how many more skills they had in managing an everyday, like this. It starts with Angela finding a way how to open herself this door to the cafe, and also in the comparison of this other little stray that now lives with me. He found himself an entrance to my building through the neighbor's garden, because my fence was too dense. So he went through the neighbor's garden and then went around and then went upstairs in my apartment through the window. There is no way that my spoiled prince-owned dog would ever do such an effort. He waits until someone opens the door. What I found very interesting is when you said the teeth and the claws. I saw very white teeth in street dogs, much whiter than the teeth that I know from dogs who live with people. I cannot make sense of that. And I know also that when this tiny stray moved in, he had very white teeth, and now his teeth are not so white anymore. What then makes me, as being socialized in this human-dog relationship, where the dog has an owner and he gets some training and he is walking on a leash and he's always controlled, it was really, really interesting how much more a contact zone can become when you give the dog the agency. When you give him the chance to, I don't know, manage his everyday by himself and to find entrances by himself. So I would say it's a different horizon of skills that stray dogs develop and then can use. But that's also the tragic element, because on the abandoned dogs, like by what skills they have, it was very visible to say how long a dog is on the street, and also how the coat looks and how do they behave. The very clean coat and the very helpless dog was abandoned recently. The dog with a lot of ticks, the dog with a lot of fleas, not such a great coat, but knows how to deal with the street, is either there for generations or has been there for a long time and has learned to sort of manage his life on its own. So that their ways of adapting with the streets actually also gave quite good hints for where they are around and for how long they are around. That goes in your direction. I see. Yeah. Sorry, I took the moderator. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I'm so sorry, but I have another question. I
Yeah.
was wondering about how do you
Did only me lose her?
No, I can't hear her either.
Okay.
can you hear me?
Daniela, we couldn't hear you for a while.
Hello?
Yeah, I think it's good now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I had a question. I was wondering how do you deal with the picture of the dog and the dog that you're seeing? Talking about Donna Haraway theory of representation, or well, that the picture we have of dogs, but the experience we have with a dog. This question is because, well, I'm an MA student in history, and I don't have like this kind of experience with informants in real life, like alive informants as you guys have. I have to be reading fonts of the past, press, etc. And I was wondering how we can deal with the picture of the dog and the dog itself. Like when you met, for example, a dog, how do you deal with that? That's the question. Like.
By picture, you don't necessarily mean a picture like a photography, you mean a picture like a representation, no. Right?
Yes, like the representation, yeah.
I I need to make this a little bit broader, because speaking as an ethnographer, as an anthropologist, ethnography is representation. Like ethnography is representing everyday life worlds of others. So everything that I do is a representation, and this is actually a thing that is also very much a critical element of ethnography, because how can we do a representation? Like how can we learn to translate in a way that we can make a representation that is still not writing things down or cutting it into a very small picture that is actually much more complex. I took the ways of representing a street dog actually as also a part of a research tool. When I say how can we do a multi-species ethnography, I mean ethnography has been entered the world as an idea of research between human subjects. Like human subjects form a dialogue, and then one of the subjects writes a story about the dialogue, writes the representation of the dialogue. And for multi-species ethnography, we need to bring the researcher's body much more in. For multi-species research, we need to accept that there is non-verbal communication with other than human research partners. Otherwise, you cannot do multi-species ethnography. But what happens in multi-species ethnography is that you form such of a triangle of research partners. Like you have for example, the street dog, and then you have the human he forms a contact zone with, and then you have the researcher. So you form a triangle of story and a triangle of representation. And what I get are two stories. I get what I can get on my own from the non-human research partner, and I get the story of the significant other. And in order to get the story of this human significant other, I also ask them if they can share with me pictures. For example, when I put it now very much on the picture level, I asked them to get the mutual biography better. I asked them, can you share me pictures of the time when she was young, or when she showed up, or of the day when this and this happened. And so then discussing this representation of the dog together leads to a deeper understanding, that on a methodological level. And then there is another thing that comes back to ethnographic representation, is how the research partners get into the stories, because we say we think about research doing it more cooperative, more collaborative, not only getting information from them and writing a story that will give me a higher social standard. but also working with them and trying to form a network where everyone can somehow benefit from. And then is the question, how do we represent that in a story that is then again written by one author? Because unfortunately, university wants the thesis to be written by one author in order to say this is your doctoral thesis. So so there is the discussion about how can we as ethnographers represent research partners in our work, and it becomes a broader story, a broader issue when we ask, okay, and how can we represent the non-human others? And in this paper, unfortunately, it doesn't have any pictures. That was the layout of it, was without pictures. But for the thesis, for example, I do it the way that I don't put pictures of the human research partners, because I have their voices, I have their stories firsthand. And in order to represent the non-human research partners better, they are in with pictures. I tell their names, like all the human research partners are anonymized. I use pseudonyms for all of them. But the dog research partners are there with their real names, because the names are a result of the contact zone. They have been given to them in the contact zone. And I put them with the name and with pictures and with space in the text, So these are at least my strategies to not only do a multi-species ethnography, but also to put the multi-species ethnography then on this very actually boring medium of a paper, of a text, that unfortunately university asks us to hand in as a result of a complex project. So, but I'm happy to get the other ideas of how other multi-species researchers deal with that.
Thank you, Elisabeth. I'm afraid we've run out of time now. So if there are any other questions from any of the other participants, and I know that I have a couple left, I will mail mine to you. And maybe we can continue the conversation over email like that. And if anybody else has something to say, that route is always open. Thank you so much, Elisabeth, for accepting our invitation and for being here with us this evening, for your marvelous article, which I loved reading, and I think all of us did, for the great discussion. Yeah, and you just asked for the name of the author, and I am also interested in it.
Yeah, it's okay. Then we have it in the chat now. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your final words.
That's good. So thank you everybody else also who's here. And we look forward to seeing you at the next table talk. We'll keep you informed about when that's happening and with whom. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a really great time.